Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. So, the updates have been a little bit relentless as far as the solo mode of Master Duel, in that, as I am currently recording, there is this Duelist Cup, there's been festivals, there's kind of something every couple of weeks that just really wants you to play a lot of the multiplayer, and yet they also give you these solo mode updates that most players I don't think really have enough time to spend on. And there's not really a super reward. Here you can see the Duels Cup has a whole bunch of rewards. Particularly, take note here, 8 days to play the remaining of 50 duels. That's a lot of time. Every month, it seems pretty much within the first week, you'll end up getting a daily quest that says duel and solo mode, but the trick seems to be better to just wait until you have a few days left at the end of the month to do that daily quest. That way you don't end up getting multiple duel and solo mode things. As far as lifetime rewards, though, for playing in solo modes, there's probably not too much. Although they have reduced the requirements on some of the daily quests in particular to not exclude solo mode anymore. So, like here, they've added the number of slots you can have to build different decks, although I think most players probably were pretty good at 20 to start with, which I think was the old limit. I'm really only playing with one deck anyways, but maybe in solo mode you can make some progress there. Most of these other lifetime things are unlikely to make significant progress, and of course increasing your duelist level is not going to be affected by solo mode. So yeah, they really have yet to update it to a point where single player mode, solo mode, makes sense. It doesn't really get you gems, it doesn't really get you cards at a significant amount that you would want to come back and play it. Uh, but yeah, they've added a solo player deck challenge too that will maybe record, or maybe I'll just do that off screen. I may have promised to do that off screen last solo episode I made. And then they've added Legends of Star Heroes and the Invincible Bee Troopers, and this is a gate, so doing this or doing this very possibly unlocks even more content. They've also come back and changed some of the loner decks in these previous ones that I've already completed to, I assume, make them easier, because there definitely were some cases where the loner decks you were given were not things that would succeed well, or you would just really have to bang your head against the wall and try to get lucky over and over again. So for today we have a narrative here where I've done everything as far as chosen by the world of legacy, and I've done everything as far as the gift of the martyr, but I can't remember any of this, so probably wouldn't be terrible to just play this and remind myself which story this is. Arm rushed to the base of the world lance, but it was too late. So this was that slightly longer narrative where there was giant weapons and the heroes were being led around by this little pixie character that turned out to actually be a bad guy and took over control of the anime girl here. By the time he arrived, Ibli had already finished activating the world lance, and so there's one more guy. And then there was a little dragon character, I think, maybe. With the newfound power of the Wildlands, Ibli launched an aggressive assault on Arum with such destructive force that each blow shook the earth. Arum faced the attacks alone. Maybe the other guy already died. In the face of those attacks, Arum now laid wounded on the ground. And you can definitely tell there's a lot more story and narrative put into this expansion than most of the others. But it's so silly that they wouldn't have put out the entire story back to back to back or at the same time. Ibli moved to pick up Arum's discarded sword, now swinging it over and over as if to check its weight. Then Ibli moved in closer to inflict a final blow on Arum. Arum couldn't move his upper body, let alone stand up. Just as Ibli raised the sword to strike, a small shadow emerged from Arum's cloak. Yep, there's the little... I guess it's not quite a dragon creature. The problem with this, though, is even if this is slightly reminding me of what the story is, and just refreshing my memory, it definitely isn't going to remind me what the gameplay mechanic as far as these cards was all about. I think it had something to do with weapons and special summoning and merging with this character. The young dragon, Imduk, summoned his otherworldly power between the young boy and the girl, determined to help his companions in their time of crisis whenever he could master. The power suppressed the evil that dwelled in Ib, if only for a moment. So this is, I guess, the evil fairy spirit. By suppressing Lee's evil spirit, the spirit of Ib that had resided deep into the depths had now awakened. Wasn't this the one where she ends up like killing herself? Because that would be the narrative. The obvious turn is that she'd have to turn the sword on herself very quickly to stop herself from being taken over again. Arum laid on the ground palace. Imduk was exhausted of his powers and unable to move. These names are pretty awful. And Ib was now holding a sword in her hand. Realizing her situation, she made her decision. Only she could put an end to Lee's evil desires. Her hand that held the sword now tensed her strength. Lee realized Ib's intentions and tried to resist, but Ib's awakened spirit overcame her. So yeah, again, a lot more animation put into this, a lot more zoomed in animation. Interesting, she has this like musical note on her chest. I don't think music played any part in the story. She sees a flashback of a childhood friend desperately calling in her direction. The young girl drew short, rapid breaths, pointed the blade towards herself, and when Nigirishi arrived at the scene and he saw his childhood friend holding the limp body of his little sister in his arms, repeatedly calling her name. So yeah, the other guy wasn't dead, he was just not there. At the cruel end of this surreal scene, the older brother could do nothing but stand there, stunned and speechless. Alright. So that's a decent point to have just ended the story on that ironic ending. So, to add more narrative to it is just really a desire to make more of a story of this world. This almost feels like something that could have been a filler arc in one of the later Yu-Gi-Oh shows. Which, as far as the Yu-Gi-Oh animes, I confuse myself a lot. There was 5 seasons of the first Yu-Gi-Oh show and at least one movie that were all around Yugi and Yami, and then the Yu-Gi-Oh 5Ds and the next generation of Yu-Gi-Oh shows all have their own number of seasons, but I didn't watch any of that, so I don't know how many. I wouldn't be surprised if each further generation of the Yu-Gi-Oh series had 3 or 4 seasons and didn't make it to a full 5. And certainly I'm sure all of them had some filler arcs where the animators just needed to buy some time because the writers weren't done. I believe actually the creator of Yu-Gi-Oh! Passed away in between the last recording of the solo episodes here and this one. But he really hadn't worked on Yu-Gi-Oh! In a fairly long time anyway, so while that is a big loss, it's not going to stop Yu-Gi-Oh! From being made. I would assume, and I'm talking a lot here, I do recognize that it could have been that this card expansion was put out and that there were cards that came with that kind of backstory in some form of advertising, whether that was a side comic book they sold or if it was just internal documents or if it was a filler arc in the anime. And then maybe a year, maybe 6 months, they came out with a continuation. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a year at least between like the card expansion that this solo mode represents versus a card expansion that this solo mode probably represents. But it might not have any connection to actual card expansions. It might very well be the case that this narrative is just based on one card expansion, all three of them, and they're just writing the story now as we speak. Anyways, so the secret powers of the planet. Arum and his linked comrades, the Crusadia, are up against a new foe, the Orcust, who can be called back from the graveyard even after they are destroyed. One question remains: who is the mastermind behind these menacing machines? A new world legacy battle is about to be unleashed. So yeah, the phrase world legacy probably was the name of the expansion. Arum and his linked comrades. Who would his linked comrades be, though, if they lost the anime go? Well, this is a mouthful, to say the least. Scenario, 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 then some extra scenario and scenario, and you don't even get to duel until you're all the way to the right of the screen, and then you have two separate locks. Well, this is going to be a nightmare. So unless these scenarios are very quick, or they are recap, that's going to be weird. This might be a case that they wrote a ton of narrative for the solo mode. A few years had passed since the nightmare of a tragedy, that nightmare of a tragedy. That might be the case, is that this is just being thrown out as we wrote way too much for our own liking, and so now we have to hand you what is effectively a visual novel, a kinetic visual novel at that, and not a good one. When Arum awoke, he found that the girl and her brother were no longer with him. Was Ib really gone now for good? So the brother took the girl's body and left. The loss of the girl had its grip over Arum's heart like an unbreakable vice. It's probably worse to just refer to her as the girl than just call her by her name, even if her name is awful. I couldn't protect Ib. If only I were stronger, then her death could have been avoided. The battle had left a chasm in Arum's heart. And we're kind of back to the solo mode, just doing some very basic visual effects for backgrounds. Now that Ib was gone, Arum had tasted for the first time just how terrifying a battle could be, how devastating losing someone you treasured could be. He didn't have the heart to go on with his journey, not for now. However, there was still one thing on his mind that bothered him. It was Ningirsu. Ningirsu? Man, I'm not going to pronounce that right. Even now, Arum had no idea where he had gone. No doubt despair had taken him now that his beloved sister was no more when Arm thought about how Ningirsu, man, I'm gonna say a bad word here if I'm not careful. I may have already said it. Let's just call him Ning going forward. How Ning must be feeling right now. His heart became fraught with an immovable weight. So almost immediately you assume he is going to be the new bad guy, trying to bring back Ib. But that was exactly why Orm had to go after his childhood friend, and so the swordsman resumed his journey with Imduk. And so now you have an evolved form of Orm, an evolved form of Imduk as cards to be highlighted here. And that would be more evidence in my mind as to why this probably was a 2 or 3 year event in which they came back to the World Legacy packs and added new cards. Which they definitely have done with other expansions in Yu-Gi-Oh! And other card games. If anything, it probably wouldn't be a terrible idea if Magic the Gathering did that more. It was when panic was beginning to settle in Arm's mind. Was it coincidence, or did the mech knight that dwelled within him lead him to it? He stumbled across a dormant crawler. These were the monsters they were kind of mostly fighting at the very beginning of their journey. It occurred to Arm that this might lead to a clue. He could try and restore it and see if its communication system still worked. Very little reason, in my opinion, to have a narrative separated out so much. Like, you could have just given me 3 cards for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bits of narrative, and then taken these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bits of narrative and squeezed it all down into one scenario. That would have worked just as well. Or seems like you're not always going to get cards. You can also get card backs and probably some other things. Arm succeeded in restoring the crawlers and gained access to its communication system along with a number of records. I believe the case was that these crawlers were like machines that had kind of a hive mind and had a commander robot controlling them. So you just had to defeat the commander. That detailed areas in which the swarms were active and data on their locations where many crawlers had been destroyed. Perhaps there was still some life left in those areas, and if there was, maybe yet they would know where Ning had gone. These are the same cards. Armed with the new clue, Arm set off to the areas he had gleaned from the records. However, as useful as the information was, it unfortunately did not make Arm's expedition any easier. There was nary a sign of life to be spotted anywhere, and the journey was looking like it could end in vain. Nature, uncaring and unrelenting, continued to batter the two mercilessly. I vaguely recalled that this was also a world that had been mostly destroyed by the robots, and these people were in a hidden village that was protected, and that was basically seeming to be the only place that was hidden and protected. But at last a glimmer of hope. At the end of the arduous tunnel, Arm and Imduk stumbled across the remaining tribes of the planet. That of the fiery recluses, the stalwart beasts, the sacred lakeside trees, so not very humanoid characters. Although this encounter brought no clues to Ning's whereabouts, Arm and Imduk were blessed with the legends and knowledge of the tribes. So they're introducing new characters still to be in that same world, in the same narrative. which ideally you almost wish there was a connected timeline or multiverse that would connect all of the different Yu-Gi-Oh! Worlds. They give themselves a lot of freedom by not connecting certain cards and narratives, but it also creates the actual case where a lot of cards really are just drawn to look cool and don't make any sense compared to other cards. But that tends to be what happens to almost every collectible card game anyways. Either that or it's like Magic the Gathering, where everything is fairly stagnant visually and you don't really have a lot of cards that look that cool. But we've been through so many solo modes already that show there is no way these narratives really could be connected together other than perhaps a multiverse. Even the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime series cartoons really only make sense when they are connected by a multiverse. And by linking together, Arum was able to unlock a great secret power of the world and witness the tremendous power that slumbered in its depths. I guess it is a little easier just to use the mouse to read. I feel like this World Legacy expansion probably was the point where linking and link summoning was first introduced, and at this point it is a major factor in standard Yu-Gi-Oh! Gameplay. You really aren't going to have a very good deck if you don't have any link summoning in it, unless you're just playing some other strategy that doesn't need that. It made him think of the World Chalice powers that were bestowed to him. But this was greater, far greater, hiding unbeknownst to the dwellers of the planet. Was this what Lee had sought? Arum thought. And we're just gonna end up burning through all of this narrative, not really not as fast as I would like. And the real move here would be to actually potentially just skip all of this if you don't care about the narrative and move the game forward, get to rewards, and just move on with your life. Now, I've seen this character, but I've probably just seen this character in a card. My fuzzy memory does not remind me if this is supposed to be the girl in a younger form or a reincarnated form. Seems like she has some kind of magic wand that looks like it might be a key and a sword. It's kind of a little bit more anime than most of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Animations are, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Starting in the early 2000s, late 90s, sticks more towards that animation style, which means it's pretty much skipped the more recent fad of the moe animated style. While this character probably would be described as moe by Japanese people, it's still not really much in that style, because the moe characters tend to have shorter arms, shorter legs, and just in general look shorter and slightly younger, whereas this still feels like a fairly young girl character, but the longer arms, longer legs, and gives her more height and makes her look more realistic. I guess if you reincarnated the girl, that brings her back into the story, or if some machinery brings her back to life. What were the more secrets dwelled beneath the surface? One of them was the rebirth records inscribed with the history of the planet, chronicles from generations long forgotten. Interesting idea. If you could potentially connect all the different narratives in the solo modes into one world, if the one world is basically like the Matrix and people die and then they get respawned. But that also may not be the case. That still doesn't really explain some of the previous narratives where there are characters that straight up destroy entire worlds, entire universes. And the other bygone memories of the planet's glorious ages where humans ruled from the apex. They're using the same music over and over again. Long ago there was a god who ruled the skies. Looks kind of like a bat. With dragonkind as its disciples, it prepared the cycles of destruction and rebirth to maintain the balance of the realms. Maybe it's supposed to be a dragon. It's kind of hard to tell with the text over it. Yeah. However, the scale of destruction grew bigger each time, and one day the balance of the two was thrown into great disarray. So this is destruction and this is rebirth. Once this delicate balance toppled, even the sacred skies could not hold back the destruction it wrought. The god decided that it could no longer oversee the skies by itself, but the power of creation had brought forth layers and layers of the toughest earth and sealed the powers of destruction within. Now, with nowhere to go, the powers raged and raged until it boiled and scorched the very earth, morphing it. Interesting, so that's this planet. The torment of the power rushed through the lands and merged with the powers of creation, leaking out onto the surface. Right, so the powers of destruction escaped, merging with the powers of creation, which was, I guess, just everywhere. It became a small manifestation of the cycle of death and rebirth and gave life to the lands. With the last of its strength, the god then turned itself into a key. So this key is the god, and entrusted it to a life blooming on the planet before vanishing. For years following its disappearance, the powers of the destruction re-emerged on the surface many times. However, every time it did, the life on the planet would use the key and, with the help of the dragonkind, push it back to whence it came. Over time, the key came to be known as the Word, and the power of destruction as the Great Darkness. Thus, the great legend of the world hero was born. Which that doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe in Japanese that makes sense, because the key is known as the Word, or as Word. Like, there's a typo here. Yeah, they really are just rushing to get these solo sections out, which honestly doesn't really improve Yu-Gi-Oh! By much by adding solo sections. But yeah, even in Japanese, as Word or Word in Great Darkness probably does not merge in the Japanese pictorial symbols into World Hero. Starlight Hero, your sword swathed in light, may you triumph over the Great Darkness. And there you had a very Japanese thing there where they show you a picture of an anime girl that has nothing to do with that specific scenario. And now it seems like we're probably going back in time. If anything, it feels like what they're trying to do is just give us more of the secondary currency, which they have just been all over the place as far as the costs to unlock gates. I'm at 0 with greens, I'm at 600, 850 with reds or oranges. And this whole secondary currency concept, I like it thrown in the bin. There's really no need for it to exist at all. It's not like the secondary currency can be used to buy anything else other than unlocking single player mode stories and gates. Meanwhile, they have added new accessories and card backs and things in the shop and I could see a secondary currency for shop points, something that was like 1/10 of what a crystal was worth, and earning that by playing the single player mode over and over again to grind out card packs. Decades, centuries, maybe millennia passed since the beginning of the rebirth records. The land was now populated with life known as humanity. Yeah, that definitely looks like humans. There was a civilization who had gained scientific knowledge and technological know-how. Is know-how one word or two? Maybe it's one word. And were at the height of their prosperity. Their glory came at a cost, for it not only tore the planet's gifts away from it, but it also the dragons who protected it. The gods and the dragons, I guess that would be the god key, and the dragons that once had faded into obscurity as mere tales. And it was during this time that the key was excavated and uncovered. The humans were exhilarated by such a legendary and mystical find, although its authenticity, can't pronounce that, became gradually acknowledged. Some expressed worries and doubts at the discovery. What did it mean for the key to have resurfaced in this time? Was this an omen warning them of the inevitable battle between the world hero and the Great Darkness, like the legend said? Now that they could see the key existed in its sword form, did it not also mean that the powers of destruction were indeed sealed deep within the planet's crust? Humanity began to assemble their finest to analyze the key. Within the team that had formed, there was a scientist who had shown her talent in all fields of medicine, astronomy, and archaeology, which that's a lot of different fields. Also, this doesn't look like a human at all. You've got like little lamb ears and snout, and this is probably just a poorly drawn hand, but this could also be lamb ears. Interesting. They're also going all over the place, which they do that with a lot of these expansions, certainly, where you're just like, let's have an expansion for Yu-Gi-Oh, but let's have robots, mechs, swords, dragons, magic, betrayal, gods, destruction, creation. It's like they didn't throw a dartboard at a wall with keywords. It's like they threw 100 darts at a wall with keywords instead of focusing down more. Her name was Lee. Lee was known all over the world as the foremost authority in computer science. So I assume this is that Lee fairy character. I guess she wasn't a fairy character, she was a spirit character. And maybe this is just some hairdressing and not a second set of ears. The analysis was able to proceed smoothly thanks to her involvement. Not long after, the team branded itself an organization called Crusadia under the jurisdiction of the Confederation of Natures. Have we heard the phrase Crusadia? Maybe, maybe not. It is possible that Lee was even evil now, and she's just infiltrated humanity and pretended to be one of them. Once they had analyzed the key further, they began to draft a plan that would help fight the imminent threats to their planet. It would involve warriors with a mechanical nature, and they called it Project Mech Knight. Work was to proceed without a moment's delay. Meanwhile, Lu drew up a hypothesis and sought to validate it in secret. She wanted to get to the root of the appearance of the Great Darkness that the world hero legend spoke of. Record in the legend were multiple tales of the key being used to drive back the Great Darkness by harnessing the powers of creation and destruction. It might also be a case that Lee is actually good at this point and she gets corrupted by destruction or darkness. It was a simple enough story, the Great Darkness would appear and the world hero would fight it back with the key. However, could the reverse also not be true? That using the key was the very thing that drew the darkness out. There were those who were entrusted with a divine mission, and conspirators who sought to revive the powers of destruction. The world hero legend was ultimately a story of their power struggle over the key. I don't know why you would ever even... I mean, you would have to really be a group of anarchists, basically, to actively try and draw out something called the Great Destruction. But it's kind of believable, too, that over decades people might believe that there is a lie in the official stories, and that there might be some benefit to bringing out the destruction or siding with the other side. Whoever has the key will control the fate of the world, or so went Lee's hypothesis anyways, and the more time she spent trying to validate it, the darker her ambitions grew. Like, yeah, it really is just her thinking that there are actually conspirators trying to bring out the darkness. She very well may be the only one that actually did try to do that. The divine powers will be mine. Seriously. Though at this rate, it's taking so long to just get through the story that we need to just do a battle just to have a breakup of different activities. A few years have now passed since Project Mech Knights began, and finally the Mech Knight of the Morning Star was complete. It had been fitted with a core powered by the key and possessed enough power to fight the most deadly of wars. However, an incident occurred during the test run with none other than Lee as the test pilot. With the key, she had reversed all of the celestial power coursing through its mechanical body and diverted it into the plant's core faster than anyone could make a move. Lee had planned all of this out before taking her place as test pilot. The power that had flowed into the power's core split the lands, and once again, the destruction from within overflowed to the surface, scorching every bit of the earth it touched. So, yep. She does seem like she was the first bad guy. The entire world was beginning to split apart, and an unprecedented disaster and the revival of the Great Darkness drew ever nearer. However, its resurrection was not without its obstacles. The Crusade had created as assistive units 7 Mech Knights in total. And so we've got these cards, which I think we've seen all of these cards before. The remaining Mech Knights faced off against Mech Knight of the Morning Star. Morning Star being another name for Lucifer. So Lee is the Lucifer, the devil of this world, and destroyed it, sealing away the Great Darkness back within the earth once more. But the Great Darkness was, at the end of the day, a divine force, one that the mortals failed to seal away completely. Inspired by the key, the team decided to put their powers into physical vessels of their own and left them on the surface as legacies. And see, we're being shown the world giant weapons, which I'm not sure we even saw all 7 of the giant weapons in previous narratives. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't. Now that the lands were ruined, it was getting harder and harder to live in such conditions. It seemed that life on this planet would gradually be snuffed out, including humanity. The reason why the Master of the Key, the world hero, didn't appear in our time of need is because we humans drained the planet of its powers. Through the Crusadia, they began to mobilize to put an end to humanity's so-called glory, as it was the largest obstacle to the revival of the barren lands and the planet's chances of surviving. So they're gonna end up both making the mech knights and the robots, it seems. They left the 7 mech knights they had built in their ruined world after they were programmed with instructions to help rekindle the planet. The mech knights were also installed with data of the Crusadia members that had established a brain link with. If the lands could be healed once more and the planet could take back its power it once had, then perhaps they could avoid imminent disaster. The Crusadia left all their hope to a faraway future that they may not even reach. However, there was one thing they failed to realize. The mastermind behind the incident was Lee, and she had already been taken by the burning lands. When she was found, she was already dead. Which, I don't even know what this image is supposed to be. But only in flesh. Her soul had been released from the physical vessel, and she had transferred into the World Legacy World Chalice, her will and her knowledge. So that is a World Chalice. And that's where they found her in the first part of the story. So who made the big robots then? That's the question. It's not particularly great storytelling either, because like this scenario and this scenario is the current storyline, and then this scenario to this scenario is a flashback, which arguably you should have just started with a flashback and eventually worked your way back up to the main storyline. Flashbacks aren't very helpful in this case, I don't think. Although that could be very subjective. The tremendous power that dwelled within the planet was the very thing that Lee was after throughout Aurum. Suddenly, when he was struck by a sense of terror, he could feel a great force of malice that threatened the planet, but from where, he could not tell. Perhaps someone somewhere was beckoning to the darkness, trying to bring it forth. He had to stop them before another terrible disaster happened. And I guess there is a slight question as to why the mech knights, which seemed like they were just programmed robots, now are just being turned into these armors that are merging with Aurum and humans. It kind of would make more sense too if they had introduced more characters that would have had more mech knight suits, since we really only saw 3 people at most getting mech knight suits. Maybe just 2. Wouldn't it make more sense to bring about 5 new characters? But it could also be a case that this narrative was Yu-Gi-Oh's special project, and they did plan on just adding more content every year or so in another expansion with new mech knights, new characters. Arguably, this could have been a outright attempt to just reboot Yu-Gi-Oh and form it into a very different thing as far as the card game narrative. A different card game that I was playing before this, Shadowverse is the name, basically is trying to do that. After many years of being one narrative, they've decided to make an anime and a reboot game that sets it in a completely different universe and gets rid of all of its current focus and its current narrative and current characters, which is weird because they also spent way too much energy, Shadowverse did, on its solo story and characters with just a ton of dialogue. There's a lot of dialogue here, but it's nothing compared to the mind-numbing droning that happened in the single-player story content for Shadowverse. And this game keeps it definitely to like a middle school level, or where you're only getting 2 sentences per screen and only a few screens. We're not getting walls of text, thank goodness. In that moment, in Arm's mind, the figure of Ning appeared. The figure of his childhood friend, tormented with sadness from the loss of Ib, seeking darkness in his despair at the Dueled. Although slight, he could feel Ning's presence within the matter. It couldn't be... ... Arm reined his uneasy heart in. He would need help to stop this malice. He asked the elders of each tribe to lend him their strength. So, is this the idea that each of these is also going to be a Mech Knight suit? Or each of these characters will get a Mech Knight suit? I guess that would make sense. I don't know if they ever gave the dragon character a Mech Knight suit, but it kind of seems like they did, with this blue flowing energy. But then when you look at like this character, it's just all these red gems. I'm not really seeing any blue flowing energy, and it doesn't really seem like any blue flowing energy here and here. So maybe later in the story, each of these 3 characters would unlock a new Mech Knight, which that also still would probably work fine. And they answered his pleas with a great number of warriors and tribes, and the tribes united in a formidable alliance. They named themselves after the warriors of old that their writing spoke of, and thus the second coming of the Crusadia was born. Crusadia being a spin on the word crusades. The Crusadia were taken to a hidden spot by the tribe of the Sacred Trees and activated the World Legacy World Crown, so we hadn't seen that one before. You can see again just a static kind of blurry image with some visual effects put on top of it. This game still also has whatever this tracking information is. I have to assume this is some kind of YouTube tracking information for any video put on YouTube. Either that or it's a bug that has just been left in the game after multiple months of updates, which I can't really believe that that's the case. I have to assume that there's some kind of barcoded thing here in the lightness and darkness differences. Yeah, and it definitely seems like they do eventually get mech cards. Although weirdly, I guess this guy merges with a horse at some point. Aram does, because this is the lion, and this was the short wizard-like character, and this was the fairy-like character. So maybe he merges with the dragon character. Orim and his companions now obtain powers that could help them combat the malice that threatened their world. And all of these are blue characters, so these are all Link summoned characters. Which the deck I play with now does make heavy use of Link summoned characters. Although it really is just one Link summoned character over and over, and a couple of support Link summoned characters. It's not a whole collection or theme of cards. The Crusadia began to advance toward the giant tower at the center of all the malice, which I guess we're going with a Tower of Babel type thought. Of course, it's kind of late in the story to talk about a giant tower. The orchestrated Babel, towering into the sky in its metallic magnificence, surrounding it were the ore crust, mechanical weapons waiting on standby in silent formation. And interesting, because now we are getting into the whole music idea, which, wow, they foreshadowed that with the little music symbol on the character. But again, it feels like way too many keywords, way too many themes connected here. We already have fairies, dragons, animals that can speak and think, and robots, and world creation, destruction, ancient history. It's just like way too much. If this was the only story for Yu-Gi-Oh, that would be alright. Like, you could go into this level of variety and depth. But you have to remember there's like 20 or 30 other solo stories that tell completely different narratives in completely different worlds. It's so overwhelming. At the tower's base was Ning, and activating World Legacy World Wand was the only thing on his mind. Now that Aram could see his childhood friend the swordsman could only think about how much sadder he looked. Aram prayed that he was only overthinking the situation, but he knew that their reality was not a kind one. Ning was here because he wanted the powers of darkness. He was at the center of the malice Aram had felt. And so we have a slow pan up here. And yeah, he looks a lot older and a lot more menacing now. Very anime still, with long purple hair. That was the truth that awaited him at the end of his long search. But no matter how much time had passed, no matter how things had changed, the one thing that remained the same was that Ning was still his friend. Aram thought about what he could do now that he was here. He had to stop Ning from starting a disaster that could mean the end of the world. The only one who could stop this villainy is me, Aram thought, gathering all of his courage. He signaled for his companions to mobilize, and now a new battle was about to begin. There definitely was a point here in the flashback, if you were going to effectively do the current storyline and do a flashback, there was a point here where you could have had a battle with old Lee fighting the old Mech Knights. And that would have at least let us do something. Maybe that wouldn't have introduced any new cards, because narrative-wise, that's really what we're doing here, is we're trying to see new cards. But if you were going to do that, then why not do a flash forward and have this scenario be the first scenario, and then have a battle about that, then have flashbacks explaining what had happened in the past and what led to the battle in general. And wouldn't it be a nightmare, certainly, if you can't unlock this? And I can't. We need Protector Longirsu Orchestrator to unlock the story, which I think really means, even though this branches off, we have to do this. So you need the card back now. This is new. Certainly a card back is required to unlock it, not a amount of secondary currency. Which, by all means, get rid of the secondary currency and do it that way. Or just get rid of the locks in general. The locks are meaningless. So I guess visually maybe they were just trying to make space, or maybe visually they were just trying to highlight that these scenarios are going to lead to the other side of the story. Yeah, they have a whole title here, Ning's Sorrow. When Ning saw what happened, a bolt of guilt pierced through his grief. Even in his desperation, he never imagined this would happen. Here you can see he looked very different. His eyes could hardly believe what they were seeing. How did this all happen so fast? He prayed that he was dreaming and that he was going to wake up soon. All he wanted was to see his dear sister again. As the scene of another nightmare unfurled around him, he had become embroiled in a storm of emotions. I need to save Ib. Even as his mind was numbed by the stupor, Ning's body began to move without a command. In what looked like an impulsive choice, he struck the childhood friend unconscious, taking both the other man's sword and Ib. What good was this world of Ib if Ib were not in it? What's funny though, is this supposed to be Ib or is this supposed to be Lee? It's kind of hard to tell. He would do anything, be it good or evil, if it meant that he could see her smile again. The single thought of getting his sister back was all Ning needed to force his weary limbs forward. Now, arguably, they're doing a Japanese brother is in love with sister trope somewhat here, where perhaps it would have been smarter if they had just said that they were boyfriend and girlfriend from the beginning and not related. He had the Mech Knight cores for when the 6 nightmares were defeated. I guess maybe the cores were the things why the Mech Knights no longer were around and operating, because the nightmares, although we still don't know what made the nightmares. I don't remember if the story told us. And now he also had the sword that he took from Arum. So that's 7 cores. Using the facilities that were still present in the Mech Knight headquarters, he analyzed the artifacts with feverish desperation. This world possessed a mystical power similar to that of the world legacies. If anything had a clue regarding to its specifics, it would be the Mech Knights. That might even have a way to bring Ib back. Although he was unable to glean a way to resurrect Ib, he learned a great deal about a number of facilities from the ancient civilization. Ning left the Mech Knight headquarters and set off to each of them with the lifeless body of his sister in tow. Many of the facilities he had visited had already ceased to work, and the ones that barely did provide little to no useful information. However, Ning never gave up. There must be a way he could save Ib somehow. With that unanswered belief in his heart, he resumed his grueling journey. And finally, at long last, he discovered the ancient facility that was still in working condition. Yeah, and the problem here is we're gonna... I don't remember if these were 2-hour episodes that I was recording as far as the solo mode, but we're gonna have to say that this is probably gonna be a 2-hour episode. It's already been an hour and we have not done a single even practice duel, which probably explains why you have like a 1-star difficulty practice and a 4-star difficulty duel, and then you're just done and everything else is hidden behind other locks. After this might be a new card. After countless weary roads walked, Ning had gone through more information than the average man would in his life. He had thoroughly inspected the Mech Knight courts and several ancient facilities. With what he had gathered, including files on the key and technologies thought to be long lost, he had finally unlocked the secrets hidden within the planet. The truths of the world that had been shrouded in mystery. Ning trembled with joy. He could revive his sister now. With his newfound certainty, Ning set about creating a vessel that could house Ib's soul using the ancient technologies. So he's built some kind of machine. However, the task was to be the most difficult yet. Is he putting her in a robot? I don't particularly think the concept of a soul, as most people think of it, makes a lot of sense if you assume the soul is locked within the body after death. Like, the concept of a soul has to inherently, in my opinion, leave the body upon death and go somewhere else. Wherever that other place is up for debate, certainly, but if you had a part of your body, a consciousness in your body, that just was around, trapped in a dead body forever, well, A, that sounds horrific, to just forever be trapped in an immovable shell, but B, it also kind of devalues the idea of believing in a soul or consciousness at all. It's also kind of less fun of an idea, certainly. Let's see. However, this task was to be the most difficult yet. Trial after trial resulted in countless failures and their byproducts. And as the days ticked by, he had amassed enough vessels to create his own army. So he basically accidentally created an army. But at last his efforts paid off and he was able to create a mechanical doll that would work. By synchronizing the doll with the body of his dead sisters, he had also succeeded in reigniting the functions of one of the twin swords vital to his plan. So here you have an anime mech doll that kinda looks like the girl, but not by a ton, and does seem to be, again, very musically, thematically made visually speaking. This is another case too where you'd kind of like the effects to go away, the twinkling stars and the fading in and out of darkness, which that's not just your TV doing that, or your screen doing that. You would like to be able to look at all of these images. In fact, that could be a fairly nice reward to simply just have a gallery of images that are unlocked going through the solo mode. Images that you could use as your main screen background or to just look at without having to go through the story and remember where at each point you would see that one image. But yeah, they're not giving us that. You could probably find the images if you decompile the program, but it's not worth it. Or find the images online. There's not a button here to... the other thing you could do is you could do this, certainly. And then you could hit like print screen and then make an image, a screenshot that way. I think I skipped some sentences there. A strange sense of elation began to bubble within Ning. His sister had given her life for this world. Now it was time for him to create a new world for her. Now that Ning had the mechanical doll's powers, the second step of the plan to build the orchestrated Babel could finally begin. And that's where that leaves that narrative. And so now you can unlock this. And now we can finally play. Although, interestingly, since it's a practice, you can only play with a loner deck. And really isn't a good way to look at the cards. What kind of card is this? A spellcaster? Fiend card? Is that what it is? It's hard to even tell. No, it's a spellcaster. So we can see the cards here that we're going to focus on. And another World Legacy card. And I guess anything with World Legacy in it is probably a pretty good card. Then you have some fairly standard spell cards to assist you. Then you have some specific Crustadia and well, legacy cards. Here, this one, depicting that image of her stabbing herself. So maybe that means a lot of the images that they show in the backgrounds of the solo mode are just images that were also used in the cards. Could also be a case that that it was only later on in the development of Yu-Gi-Oh! That they had high resolution big images to lean on and use in other cases, whereas I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the first generation of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards really do just have low resolution images that you couldn't blow up. There's also a fairly large difference too when you have something like this that is depicting an actual event and 4 characters compared to something like this that's just depicting a single character that's not really that important. And you only have a couple of Link Summon cards here. So this loner deck is fairly obviously created so that you can succeed in doing exactly what it tells you to do and nothing else. Okay, what makes Crusadia decks unique? This deck can allow you to link summon multiple times, especially when used in tandem with monsters whose effect lets you special summon to a zone that a link arrow is pointing to. Use this to your advantage and summon even more powerful link monsters to your field. Crusadia link monsters also gain a helpful boost in attack from monsters they point to, bolster your attack by summoning your more powerful monsters to zones that your Crusadia link monsters are pointing to when you're up against an especially tough character. So this has an attack of 2000, this has an attack of 2000, this is pointing with its arrow to this, which gives it 4000. Which that isn't even how I use link summoned monsters in my deck, so that is a slightly different strategy. Is it just going to tell us exactly what to do? Link summon Crusadia Equimax and win the duel during this turn. First normal summon Crusadia Reclusia and use the link material to link summon Crusadia Magus. Right. So it's probably helpful to summon this if you... I have a setting here for positions, which is not even going to let me change that, probably for the better thing. But if you were playing this normally, there's a setting by default where it just automatically puts anything you summon in the center. It's actually a pretty bad now concept with link summoning. It would make a lot more sense if there was more of a default strategy where everything starts at the left and moves this way to the right as you summon it, and then spells and traps probably should start at the right and move this way by default. That still really wouldn't help you in some strategies where you need that tight control to know exactly where something goes, but it would be better than starting in the middle for both the monster zones and the spell zones. And by default, if you start over here on the left, anything that's summoned in the special summon zone should probably start over here. Why is all of that the case? Because in a lot of scenarios, had I summoned something exactly here and exactly here that doesn't synergize with this arrow that's pointing backwards, then you've ruined that opportunity and played poorly. But for this demo, you're supposed to special summon Crusadia Leonis and activate the effect of Crusadia Magus. Okay. So special summon this, and it can only be special summoned to where it's being pointed by a link monster. And then activate this effect, which I don't know what this effect is actually going to do. But apparently it wants me to pull out this card to the hand. Use 2 monsters as link materials to summon Crusadia Regulux now. So this is 1200, this was 100 by default before. They did make a change so you could see the default attack here. It's still not particularly great. That you have to go all the way down here to know its default attack. But it lets you learn if you ever have time to learn while playing Yu-Gi-Oh! That is a big if, certainly. Notice this one is pointing in the other direction. Because most of the time when you're playing ranked or playing against anyone else, you have a timer and you just really don't have time to look at cards and read their effects. Nor do you really ever have extra time to build other decks or look at cards in your own collection, which I have a lot of cards now, considering I haven't put any money into this game, and the vast majority of them I haven't looked at, and I assume most of them are not really playable. Alright, so we're going to now special summon Crusadia Maximus and activate the effect of Crusadia Regulux, which in a lot of ways feels like they're doing the same thing again. So that would have brought it to a 2600 from 1000. And this time it lets you bring a spell instead of a monster. And now we're going to summon Crusadia Equimax, which, how many things does this need? 2+ effect monsters, which this one will count as 2 because there is, I believe, a card under it, and this one will count as 1. Raise the attack of Crusadia Equimax. Activate Crusadia Revival. Yeah. This one has a link level of 2. This one has a link level of 1, and that L2 lets it count as 2 in a link summon. Not the fact that there was a card under it. Special summon World Legacy Crown. What does this point to, by the way? The edges? So, again, it has to be pointing to something. And then attack your opponent directly. There's also an effect here that it's not having a spotter activate. I will say, I do feel like Yu-Gi-Oh! Has gotten pretty good about making cards and combinations of cards that aren't inherently 1-card combinations, but can get to 2-turn wins instead of 1-turn wins. Definitely not 1-card combinations, that's the wrong phrase. But yeah, the deck I played, it wins fairly well and has gotten me up to platinum and nearly up to diamond level in ranked. Can win on 1 turn, but is unlikely to win on 1 turn, but definitely can win in 2 turns fairly easily. Let's see, you have a lot of text here as far as this. We'll do a level 4 difficulty, and if we fail, eventually I'll get bored and just play with the Zodiac Tri-Brigade and we'll win that way. Which that is my main deck that wins against pretty much everything. There are definitely times where you get bad draws or where somebody has a strategy that works better. Alright, so no more holding hands. We're going to have to just figure out this as it goes. And since... Okay, we only have one kind of field spell, so we should just play that. Let's read the special effects of this as normal. Like, will we have a battle section this turn? No. So, just not put anything up since we went first. He's going to immediately send something to the graveyard and immediately start play orchestrated babble. Alright. Let's see. Let's special summon this here. Let's not activate that yet. What does this do? You can activate the effects of monsters in your graveyard or link monsters you control with or crust in the name. Interesting. Alright, well. So that's going to mean eventually we'll start here with this. And we'll put it here because that will point to these cards. Alright, we'll special summon that there. And activate that effect. And we'll take anything that has a 4 in it. Because that probably means something good. Inflict piercing damage. I don't think I want to do that. Alright, let's try this. We'll just activate things. We're really just trying to bring every card to the field that might have any value. Right. 2100 doesn't feel like enough. Attack all monsters once each. I don't think that's good enough either. So let's move on forward. Special summon there. I think I probably activated an effect here that was a mistake. And then I'm potentially trying to protect a character here. Just try to negate and tribute a character. I've activated way too many cards now to protect that one character. Alright. And this would just bring us back. So this is probably the point where you've boned it up. Or I've boned it up. And I've run out of steam. It doesn't mean I can't win here. It just means that it probably was a better strategy. And definitely I played too many cards. What does this one do? Summon this. It would be better as a defense position card. There. Yeah, give me a card. By all means, give me something. Do I want to sacrifice that for 300 to so his effect doesn't activate? Probably. Apparently that can't counter things from the graveyard. You can see he's running out of cards. But it may not matter. If he can pull off enough of a strategy. Which, yeah, that definitely feels like he's pulled off a strategy there. Okay. Special summon this. Point it here so it doesn't point towards that. Foolish Burial. We'll see if there's something that is actually that valuable being buried. I don't know. We'll throw that in the graveyard. Like that's something. There's not a lot to do or a lot you would want to do. Well, I assume I couldn't direct attack, but maybe I could have. That's a possibility. But yeah, again, he's out of cards, but so am I. And he's got enough spells that I don't understand, as far as continuous spells, continuous traps, and field spells, that I am certainly going to question things. Oh yes, add something to my hand by all means. Give me, I guess, this one. And then he's trying to negate something, which probably is better if I negate that and tribute that. Negate the negation. Yeah, almost certainly this is going to increase my attack more. Let's see. And this activates a piercing damage, but we don't need any piercing damage. Ironically, we're still 100 short from winning. But we are going to win on the first try, which that's acceptable. Certainly it would be fairly frustrating to spend this much energy to get this far and then have to start all over again. It's worth it to sacrifice this guy just to counter any activation because I only need to do 100 damage, so anything that stops him from putting any monster on the field as a defense is good. What's funny here is that there hasn't been a single special summon, normal summon, I think, in this entire game. If there was a normal summon, it was at the very beginning, a single normal summon. And everything else has just been special summon pointing towards Link monsters, Link summoned characters. Right. And for your own education, it might have been worth it to activate that field spell just to make sure it works the way the text on it actually works. I suppose it is worth mentioning that the card Maxi was acting differently than how it was actually described to work, and has been ever since the launch of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, and they finally changed it. So for several weeks, and even now, you occasionally run into somebody that thinks Maxi works the old way and tries to play it, and then is surprised to find it's not working that way. So this one needs purples, and this one needs everything, including all of my greens that I just earned, which, yeah, I think that highlights perhaps a desire to get rid of this secondary currency. Alright, well, let's go here. There's no more story except for the final goal, so these are just going to be challenges, practices to learn how to play, I assume, the other side of the deck. And there might be actually some logical improvement to this single player story in that they are going to try and get you to play two competing decks more often and really learn what those two competing decks are, whereas previous solo expansions have had like one challenge where you play as one deck, then another challenge where you play as the other deck, and then they kind of forget about that, and then you're just playing as the main deck that they're interested in highlighting instead of the counter deck. So if we start to see more of a top-bottom split being the standard way that single-player story mode goes, that might be a good thing, where we end up playing more of the counter decks. Of course, in the past, it's also kind of felt like these counter decks are specifically designed only to counter that type of deck and not very robust in actual play. All of these decks are probably not that robust in actual play. They may have been when they first came out, but now they lose their value. What makes an Orcust deck unique? One common way of extending plays with an Orcust deck is to banish your own monsters from the graveyard as the cost to special summon other Orcust monsters. Orcust monsters that were banished as a cost can be returned to the deck via effects of the Orcust Link monsters and reused. Take full advantage of this and bring on the Link summons. So, graveyard to the banished pile. Graveyard, banished pile. Graveyard, banished pile. And this guy has 5,000, where the last practice deck we did had 4,000. And I guess this deck is called Furious Machine, but you probably don't have a way to actually look at this deck if you wanted to. First activate orchestrated return to prepare for a Link summon. I missed that first sentence. Activate a normal spell. Probably doesn't matter where I put it. Summon, send that to the graveyard. Next, send World Legacy World Wand to the graveyard to activate 1/1 and special summon Orcus Brass Bombard. Right. 1/1. Summoning this card. Well, discarding that card to actually special summon that. Interesting, it can only go in that one position. Activate the effect of World Legacy World Wand that you sent to the graveyard to activate 1/1. Interesting, they're telling me very specific positions to place these cards. Activate the effect of Orcus Harp Horror from the graveyard and special summon Orcus Symbol Skeleton from the deck. This really highlights how you really need to know your cards backwards and forwards if you're going to play this kind of deck. And you should do that for any deck you're playing, is that there should just be a expert level of understanding. Use 2 Orcus monsters as link summons to link summon Galatia, the Orcus Automation. Does it really want me to activate that? Guess it does. Interesting, this points only in this direction and this direction. Use the effect of Galatia, the Orcus Automation, and set orchestrated Einsatz to the field from your deck and activate it. Set a card, which would be this card. We've seen people play it. Finally, the game lets me pick where I want to put the card. Then activate the effect. When your opponent normal summons or special summons a monster, orchestrated Einsatz allows you to either send it to the graveyard or banish an Orcus or World Legacy monster from your hand or deck. When deciding on what monster to send to the graveyard or banish, think about what would be most helpful for future turns. Next, activate the effect of Orcus Symbol Skeleton from the graveyard and special summon Orcus Brass Bombard from the graveyard. What's funny is we're going to win in this turn, almost certainly, so playing a strategy that only works in the next turn is really just for demonstration purposes. Now, if we're summoning a new Link Summon monster, we have to either get rid of this Link Summon monster or put it at a point where this Link Summoning monster is pointing towards. And you can't use both of these, you can only use the left or the right, and then you leave the other one for the other player. While Link summoned Longirsu, the Orchestra cannot be destroyed by card effects. When dueling, consider how you can link monsters and use their effects to the fullest. This definitely feels more educational than most of these practices, where they're definitely just laying it down straight and thick as far as, hey, this is a good strategy, this is why this is a good card, this is why it has a good strategy, this is what you should be thinking about when playing these types of decks and these cards. Attack your opponent's life points directly. Really? And see, this is probably where I'd screw up and say, let's activate more, let's put a card down, on more cards on the field. I guess it doesn't matter though, we have a 2500 and 2500 and he's got nothing on the field, so we will just win in this turn. And there definitely have been times where I've screwed up and focused on just doing everything and playing cards to the point where I've actively messed myself up and not had any cards left for later, just in case something happened. The odds here of me getting, what is this, a mate base. That these are really dumb, but mates are dumb too, so whatever. The odds of me getting all these battles done in the next 25 minutes are kind of low, but then the odds of me getting them done in general in the next 2 hours would be kind of weird too. And I can't help but suspect that the next single player expansion will be way different. This is a completely type of deck. So you can send one monster you control that is owned by your opponent to graveyard, special summon one monster from your hand or graveyard. One monster you control that is owned by your opponent, so we'd have to take control of it. Place that opponent's. Interesting. There's a strategy here, for sure. But I'm not sure I fully understand what I'm going for here. So, let's do this, and then think about these. Now, I think you probably are best just leaving everything else here. There's this whole Jinzo machine concept here, and they're bringing back Jinzo, which is a very old card. Like, you can just tell by the art style, this is basically the first expansion of Yu-Gi-Oh! And they're trying to connect it to this new expansion and make Jinzo relevant again. Right. Which is not a terrible idea. You could certainly write better story and bring back some machines if you're including machines. And particularly this World Legacy is doing a lot of stuff. There's a lot of craziness here. All right. I don't think I want to activate this effect as I'm reading here. No trap is set up face up on the field or in either graveyard, so it's not the special summoning one. During your main phase you contribute this card. It's not my main phase either, so I have no idea what effect this is. During the main phase, I guess we're in the opponent's main phase, you contribute this card and special summon Jinzo from your hand. Then you destroy all traps your opponent complies. If it's a set card, reveal it. Yeah, that's not something I want to activate. And that's why it's important to understand what these cards do. And that's not a Link summoned card, that's an XYZ summoned card. Well, at that point I probably should have tributed it if he was gonna activate that. I may have lost at this point. Let's see. I want to special summon this back to the field. And then I want to not special summon that or not tribute that. Just go and activate this. Yeah, that doesn't do anything. That doesn't do anything. Tribute summon that. Yeah, none of that is really doing anything. Although, oddly, I could probably still win here. If he brings up another 500 attack and I just have something on the field that... let's see, let's activate this effect and see how this works. Monster cards and spell cards, alright. Monster cards. Hey, we do control Jinzo, so by all means, let's destroy a card. Although, why destroy that card instead of the other card? I don't think destroying this spell card would have done anything. There's still a small hope of victory here, but not a lot. But I will say, even though you have very high strategy happening here with a lot of cards on the field, it doesn't feel like I just am being completely overwhelmed. It doesn't feel like I don't understand the general idea. It doesn't feel like I'm going to immediately fail and have to play this multiple times. Perhaps some of that is the safety in the fact that I can just play my pre-built deck. Yep. Yeah, that definitely doesn't seem undoable as a challenge. But why not just play my good deck and see how well my good deck plays against their strategy? Because this Zodiac trait Tri-Brigade deck is just awesome. It's definitely not my idea. It's a top tier meta deck. I'm missing maybe a couple of cards and have made a few changes. One of its biggest problems certainly is that it is a kind of annoying deck because you have to go in these cycles, and these cycles can be somewhat frustrating. Like, you have to put a decent amount of things in the graveyard. To build up a reserve of special characters that you can then special summon. Which in this case is going to work fairly nicely. Can I win in one turn? No, I don't think we're quite to that point. I could put one more thing on the field, certainly. But we'll hold that in reserve. We'll go ahead and play that and see if that works. We'll toss that card. The game has also changed. That didn't do anything. Somewhat in the fact that the game has somewhat changed how it animates these actions, because it shows you the animation on first time. Now there's an option to show you the animation only the first time something is activated for a duel, but it oddly doesn't have the option to just never show you the animation in the first place. So you can see there he countered my moves as my first move fairly well, but that's not going to help him. This is again another example of why this deck is particularly slow, but it wins, so you can't complain about it. That you have to summon these 4 characters onto the field to then immediately sacrifice them and put them back in the graveyard. And then because it goes back in the graveyard, then that means you can activate these different effects. Which means add this to the hand, add this to the graveyard, banish that. And Ash Blossom here just counters a lot of activation spells and such. This card's effect lets me discard another card to the graveyard. This time I don't want to activate his abilities because there are no cards to banish, and I don't want to activate Ash Blossom because that would not be particularly helpful. And there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Back from the graveyard to this. Select here. You can put it here or here if you want. And if anything, this is something I've never actually been able to accomplish in actual play, getting all 3 of this character on the field at once. And there's basically nothing else you could do here. Summoning any of these would be a worse decision. So the best decision is just to summon that. And then we can activate that. And then banish that, that, and that. And this is just a full field. There's nothing more you can do here, even if you wanted to, and there is way too much damage here. In fact, there's so much damage here you'd have to start to get into doing some delicate math to figure out how could you, at best, do the most amount of damage. It probably would have been something closer to this, Yeah, that was the best mathematical way to do the most amount of damage. But there's no reward for doing overkill and doing extra damage either. It doesn't give you more experience points, it doesn't give you a few extra gems or anything, particularly in solo mode. It doesn't give you anything. So now that is completed with my main deck, which gave me some legacy pack tickets, which I have way too many of those anyways. I'm actively trying to burn these legacy pack tickets. They give you 2 decent cards, but they're all old cards. They're actually not decent cards, come to think of it. I think they are better described as they give you 2 legacy cards from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel collection, which means they're cards that aren't actively playable or usable. And this time we're not going to get any help again, so let's see. We don't have anything on the field. We don't have anything here. So we shouldn't place anything. We should just end the turn. This card only activates if you have no face-up cards. So I could put something face down. Like ideally, what you'd like to see here is for them to spend a lot of energy summoning monsters and activating spells and setting up a strategy, just burning through all of their cards. Because I can play Harpy's Feather Duster and there's almost certainly no strategy he can play that will counter Harpy's Feather Duster. Then I can play this and destroy attack monsters. Any monster in the attack position. Alright. Harpy's Feather Duster defeats that. Alright. Activate this. This may be the premature to do this. Let's activate this Condolence Puppet. And we'll stick something that says if this card is in your graveyard, because that would make the most sense. And we still have nothing. So while we may have severely hurt his strategy, we didn't completely destroy this strategy, which seems to just be more evolved versions of the same strategy and same deck. But you can't click over here and just look at the deck. So the only way you'd really learn these decks is just by playing them over and over again. Whereas it feels like you should be getting a deck recipe after defeating each of these characters as an addition to extra rewards. And ideally it would be nice if you were getting at least 2 rewards when you succeed in solo mode at any point. I'll just... Honestly, what happened here is we just started with a bad draw. So I'm not learning much of anything from this. It would be... The right move would be to come over here and just surrender and reset. But yeah, summon cut-ins are now 1 time only, and the other setting is 1 time only. But you can't turn them off completely, which seems weird. That was really a bad draw there. We didn't have a lot of opportunity to succeed. And then that just brings us back to the Zodiac Tri-Brigade winner. But you still have to see how this is 2 hours of extra Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm playing just to get through one of the solo modes. Right. So some other cards in the strategy are to banish 10 cards and draw 2 cards. Alright. And this time we have a different group of starting cards, so we will lean heavier into the actual Zodiac cards instead of the Tri-Brigade cards. Okay. Summon that. Activate that effect. Toss that into the field. How many cards do we have? Well, this is going to be the first turn anyway, so this once again creates a scenario that is really slow, and it's an odd little loop where you don't need to summon this in the special field, and the order of the cards to play is specific, and depending on what cards are in your graveyard changes how you actually would want to play it. Whether you would want to activate that card or go ahead and summon this and activate this card, which arguably I should have activated the previous card, because the previous card would let me discard a card and then summon it to a different position, where this card discards a card and summons it under it that increases its attack. Regardless, you have to end with this card for the best strategy, because this one destroys any face-up cards. Now at this point, I could activate this ability and destroy itself, which would put all the cards that are under it in the graveyard also, but there's not the greatest reason to do that, because then I would have to activate this ability to get this on the field to summon the final Link summoned monster. There's just no need for that yet. In fact, it may have been a little dangerous to even put this trap down, but this trap has a better advantage if it is face down, because when it is activated from a face down position, this trap will stop anything in the column from being activated and negate all of those effects. Whereas if it's just quick played out of the hand, it will only negate the effect of one monster. Which that is a lot of stuff to know. But this definitely is an example of why the default positioning of putting everything in the center is kind of bad, because very often you do run into this situation where your cards may be stacked. You really shouldn't ever have a trap and a monster in the same column, unless there's some synergy around that you are aware of and they aren't. Otherwise, you should get a small percentage advantage. Since this guy is playing a strategy of having things in the graveyard, taking things out of the graveyard is not a bad idea. So that animation will activate the first time and then not activate the second time to save you some time. Activate this now that this is in the graveyard. Putting this also in the graveyard. Activating that. Putting this in the hand. Summon that. Activate this ability to discard that. You have to be careful to activate the right ability. 1, 2, 3, 4. Of course, his effects would also be negated if you're not careful. You want to put it here so that it's pointing towards an empty spot. Activate this ability. Get rid of a trap. Banish that. How many do we have in the graveyard left? We have about 2. So, unless I wanted to destroy this and summon another one, which is probably the right move. It seems somewhat crazy to do this, certainly. Just destroy yourself when you have 3300 attack. So then you can activate this other ability here to then toss these 4 into being banished. And this points, by the way, to the sides and to the backwards diagonals. Alright. I don't believe there would be anything else here worth summoning. No, I don't think so. So 8,000. If this defeats this, I've won on this turn. Go ahead and counter whatever ability that has, just in case. So we'll have to wait till the next turn to win. Not a big deal. Again, this is what I was talking about, where Yu-Gi-Oh! Has gotten pretty good about 2-turn kills and not having 1-turn kills. If this guy can somehow turn it around and win from this, I would be shocked. There's a way, definitely. If you can kill everything on the field, I have no spells, and these cards are not immune towards just dying. Let's see. No, I don't want to summon that way. I want to activate this ability and do that. And that should be good enough. And then we'll activate one of those. You can also go ahead and activate this to remove something from the graveyard. Now this one pointed to that one, which activated that ability. And at this point you could summon this back, but you might as well save that summon in case it's necessary. We have yet another full deck. But you only have this advantage, you have to admit. I only have this advantage because I have this meta deck, and I put a lot of effort into building the meta deck. I put all my crafting points into building the meta deck and looking it up. If you didn't look online what the current good meta deck was, if you didn't know about Zodiac, Zoo Tri-Brigade or Zodiac Tri-Brigade, then you really would be lost. it's not like you can share recipes with your friends. The friend system in this game still has yet to be improved to any level where it's actually worth engaging with at all. But yeah, there's just a lot of work still that needs to happen. And these are Crusadia things, and this is another visual accessory. I think, particularly after this Duels Cup, it might be very useful for Yu-Gi-Oh! To point out to players what the top tier, highest ranked players' decks look like. Again, now we're playing the Crusadia deck. Then we just have to read all these cards and try and learn. So I'll just put that there. Is that really what we want to do? For 1,000? Or do we want to just tribute that? Well, I can't activate this. Cyber C decks. Alright, well. Maybe made a mistake there, maybe I didn't. We'll see. Starting with a 2000 usually is a good move. And it is fairly interesting that there are a lot of cards here that have like 400 or 500 attack, and some of the very old cards had like 400 or 500 attack and 400 or 500 defense, and then were just not really playable because of power creep. But for as old as Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, power creep hasn't been anywhere as big of a deal as it might have been. And this definitely would be a point here, after getting my butt handed to me like this, that I would definitely consider surrendering or failing or giving up. Right. Once per turn, you can target one Crusadia Link monster you control this turn if it battles an opponent. Right. Go ahead and activate this also. Well, that didn't work. It's interesting how you don't have to fill in your own point. Let's add this to the hand. Yeah, you don't have to fill in your own extra monster zone. I didn't know that. Alright. Battle damage is doubled. Would that work? Nope. I don't think it would. Which one does this point to? It's just not pointing to anything. You don't want to go backwards. And that's not going to work either. I should have flipped that upright and had that in attack position. Not that that would have helped too much. He's just got himself set up so well with this 2020 beefing this other character. And those spells went to the graveyard, but didn't seem to activate. Of course, the problem here, having decks play against the same kind of deck, is that you're going to have this cross synergy. Although maybe the AI is really dumb there, because that does feel like they just screwed up pretty badly. Attack becomes double. Could do 2 plus XYZs, or a tuner and a non-tuner. I don't think we want to do any of those. What is this effect going to do? Monster to change its level. Level became double. 1 tuner and 1 non-tuner. Look at that. Level 12 monster. Gain some more attack while you're at it. Look at that. Alright, so unless he just has something to turn this backwards on us, that's 1 turn, 1 blow kill. And that's an interesting strategy, to say the least. Is that a realistic strategy? Probably not. Let's just be honest. I think most players would have some more counters to something like that. But if that is a 4-star difficulty, it'll be interesting to see what a 5-star difficulty is. And it does definitely seem like the rewards are just going to be gems, crystals, for playing with the loner deck, where they are accessories. Although I don't hate the idea of getting a full set of accessories by playing through the whole story section, or one whole story section. I will certainly hate the idea of this story being wrapped up in the final goal, and then it immediately unlocks more story, and so that there would be a whole nother World Legacy storyline to follow. But that is somewhat believable, because it is questionable in the final goal scenario that we look at that it has enough time to wrap up a story, or even give it a decent beginnings of a wrap up. Okay. question here, I guess, is can we get a link monster on the field? I guess the answer is yes. You can always get this Magus on the field, which then means I can special summon that. Which let's take this one, I guess. You don't want to take something that you already had. Spell or trap. Move it to a different field. I don't think I need to move a character to a different position in the field. Actually, it might have been a smart move to move it to a different position, but whatever. Alright. Just activate both of these. Trap or spell? Let's take the spell for backup. And I guess we're at 3. Special summon that to there. Special summon that to there. Let's check this. Negate side effects. We don't have anywhere higher to go. If we don't have a 4. Let's see. And yeah, let's go ahead and just activate this effect. And let's attack. And we don't need to tribute encounter effects. In the turn, leave that where it is. Let's see. Special summon this. Put it in defense mode. Best case scenario, I guess, would be to probably put it in defense mode there. I can't imagine that this guy is actually going to be able to do anything. And I could negate his attack somewhat. I could have not activated that trap, certainly, and then activated it and put it there, but It also kind of doesn't matter. Because you can just special summon that there, get it back up. I could activate this and tribute this to target that. Don't want to activate that. Do want to activate this. And then we want to figure out who has the biggest attack, which is probably the 2000. This guy. And yeah, I don't think there's a lot of reason to change anything more. You could summon this, sacrificing that. You could summon this, sacrificing 2 of these. But I don't think there's a real reason to do any of that. I think instead you just set yourself up for victory. Attack here, you probably win. I can't really call this a straightforward strategy of a deck. Like, the concepts here are somewhat complicated. Not insanely complicated though, which is also a good thing. Like, because this definitely could have been a scenario where you started getting challenges in decks that required you to become just like a PhD level of genius as far as just understanding how the cards work. But I also like that it's not just stupid, straightforward, and simplistic. The thing I hate though is the fact that you have a whole screen here of storyline. And yeah, I'll do the rest of these off screen as far as these duels. So let's just see how the story ends. Which I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't just kind of end in this battle, starting and not really ending. Which might explain why it's in parallel. Like that. The Crusadia headed towards Ning's, where Ning was. However, before they could reach him, they had to get past the countless Orcust weaponry. The Orcust were merciless as they were numerous, and as the Crusadia suffered greatly as they tried to fight their way through. In the heat of the battle, Orym began to feel that within orchestrated babble there dwelled a power similar to that of his key. The mechanical vessel used whatever little of the key's power they had inherited and activated orchestrated babble. Here we can maybe get a slightly better look at this character. It's like a music box machine, and then piano keys at the end here. And I assume this is supposed to be a piano and not just like a dual disc. And then what looks like a flute here. So all kinds of references to music. Let's move on. From the depths of the tower, a great light was released, and the tower itself seemed to almost fall away with it as the beam stretched into the sky above. Oh, and this is what that card was that they were playing. No, the activation must be stopped, Orym thought as he dashed toward the machinery. However, before he could move any further, Ning appeared before him. It was the first time they had seen each other since that tragedy long ago. Their eyes met within the chaos of the battle. Orym opened his mouth to speak. Why, he asked. Why would you want anything to do with the Great Darkness? Why put our planet under threat like this? Why did you create a spiraling tower and this army of mechanical weapons? Ning only had a simple answer for him. For Ib. It was the only reason he needed. Interesting, it looks like you've got this giant space weapon now. So now they're throwing space potentially into this also. For his sister, he was willing to activate Babel to strike the World Legacy World Wand down from the skies and break the Earth's surface, so he could awaken the slumbering World Legacy World Arc and use its influence over life and death to revive Ib's soul. Then after the Great Darkness had been freed from within the Earth, he was going to use its power to resurrect Ib as a celestial being. Yeah, they really are just giving you an exposition dump here. Now that he had heard the truth from Ning, Orm readied his sword and knew that he had to stop this all at all cost. And yeah, here you have a very static image that looks like there's a lot of action lines being drawn, but it's really just being shook back and forth. Ning didn't budge, and instead swung his lance in return. No one was going to stand in his way, not even Orm. The swordsman knew that Ning loved Ib more than anyone in the world, but that did not make it right for him to put the entire planet in danger like this. Orm knew that Ib would not want this, even if it meant that she could live once more. However, for Ning, there was nothing he wanted more than to see his sister open her eyes again, and if that meant that he had to turn against the entire world, then so be it. Both men had already made their minds up on what they wanted to achieve. Neither wanted to budge, and so they clashed, but neither could gain a decisive advantage. The orchestrated babble activated. Yeah, it's going to just be a big expedition dump here. Here we have yet another image. And at last the World Wand had been toppled. When it fell to the earth, it gored the land below, and the resulting shockwave reverberated across the entire planet. And yeah, that seems to be exactly where they're just leaving it. Orchestrated attack. And the gate is clear. And we found a new card pack. Let's not go to the store because of that. So that didn't open up any more story, but clearly there is more story. But I can't help but wonder how many of these other narratives are really complete in the minds of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel writers, or how many more of these are just going to come back and then there will be more content. Like otherwise, in the next recording we'll just do the Invincible Bee Troopers and see if that unlocks anything new, and if it doesn't, fine. That's more than okay. The solo player deck challenges here aren't particularly that interesting to show off, because either you're going to play them with the Zodiac Tri-Brigade and win, or you're going to try the loner decks and potentially fail. And logically what I should do, come to think of it, is I should beat them all with the Zodiac Tri-Brigade, because that would be boring to play 10 or 12 duels in a row like that, and then come back and try and do them on a recording as with the loner decks. But I have suspected that that would have unlocked something new as far as story mode goes. And yeah, it's worth pointing out that there has been a decent amount of additions to the storefront as far as structured decks. Not as many as I would have liked. Mates, way too many, because I still think mates are pretty dumb. Although, really at this point, the number of mates you can buy versus the number of mates you get through other means are fairly low. there's way too many dual fields. There's way too many card protectors. Again, a lot of these card protectors potentially are from other means that you get them. Way too many icons. There's been way too few extra things, special things, as far as bundle packs and dual passes. There's only been maybe 6 dual passes because they last a month or two. Now, I only have about 1,500 gems, which would not really leave me in a good position to buy this secret pack. The good news there may be that I really shouldn't buy the secret pack anyways. Well, here's the danger. There is a decent argument in buying this pack, buying 10 packs of this, but this at least one super rare guaranteed in 10 packs doesn't tell you the full story, because if I don't get an ultra rare, which is above super rare, in 10 packs, it will then immediately offer me a guaranteed ultra rare for another pull of 1,000 gems. But I can't get 420 gems out of nowhere without spending real world money, which I'm not willing to do. So then you have this problem of having 23 hours and 59 minutes or so to try and get the difference. It's not worth it at all to not buy a 10 pack of anything. That's why I'm sitting on these Duels Cup rewards in particular. And it's different based on what you get. So, for instance, if I was to grab a 10 pack here of this, what you're going to get for the legacy packs is just almost a guarantee that there will be new legacy cards, but not 100% a guarantee there will be new legacy cards, and a very high chance that it will be normal cards, and also normal cards like this that are just completely unplayable. I don't think there's a single card that synergizes or works with Wing Egg Elf, for instance. There might be something that synergizes with a normal card or a fairy, but even that probably doesn't make this card very playable. And that's why it's a legacy pack. Now, if you get 10 of them, I am still at the point where I'm getting about half of the cards that are new. But you can also tell there's only 2 rares out of 20 cards. 3, 4, 5 rares. Well, more rares than I thought. But a lot of these cards are very much just not playable or very, very old. And that is why the game is willing to give you so many legacy packs, which is, it's given me at least 1,000 legacy packs at this point, because they're effectively worthless. Yeah. So no super rares in that, no ultra rares in that, and then 6 rares. There is also a problem that I will highlight later, in that we'll just do this for the fun of it. Well, you know what? Actually, I can't do this, because if I do this, then I'm going to do the other story mode, and then I won't have any gems. Yeah. I need to make a better decision when I do the other story mode, so I have to hold off on that. So, if you must see a card pack opening, we'll purchase another one of these. Here's an ultra rare pack. But it's not even really worth going through the animation. So, some more cards. I would like to see some of these first generation cards be redrawn. Like, it would be a little crazy to have animators redraw cards that are also not playable, but it would be kind of nice for this card to make a little bit more sense. Although at a certain point it would be insulting to the artist to also say, hey, we just don't like this art style anymore, it doesn't match with what our game has evolved into, so let's redraw it and pay an artist to redraw it, even though the card is not being changed in any way. It would make a lot more sense to try to evolve Actuator and say have a 6-star level of Actuator that evolves or can be special summoned out of the deck and just be a little bit better in its attack. Like, ideally, you could make a card like Actuator a 2000 and say, if you play Actuator, if you summon Actuator to the field, you can summon Actuator Plus out of your deck to the field instead by tributing Actuator. Having cards that you can play out of the deck is kind of crazy. Maybe you would make that an extra card instead, and then that probably would make it still not really playable, but something like that they should try, I would say. Yeah, but they probably have thought of that. Alright, well, as far as actual missions, that just got this duel and solo mode done, which will give me 40 gems. As far as lifetime progress, I'm not sure anything I just did in solo mode actually helped me or made any progress towards any of that, but whatever. Yeah, 150 more ranked duels needed, and then I could get a massive 100 gems. A lot of these lifetime goals are not worth it. Alright, well, we've been going 2 hours and 37 minutes, which does certainly open up the door for the next recording to be potentially very short in comparison. But I think we did the right thing there, because it would have been very awkward to have ended this episode halfway through that solo mode and just have seen a bunch of front-loaded storyline without actually seeing any of the gameplay. So yeah, let's not make this any longer. That's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend to follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and give me a game off my wish list. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.